Two officers dragged a quiet black man into court, smirking as they handed him over. They laughed at his name, Elijah Monroe, and made a show of mocking his silence, until he placed a badge on the judge's bench that froze the entire room. The bailiff barely looked up when he called the name, Monroe, Elijah. A quiet murmur passed through the courtroom, soft, hesitant. But no one stood, not until a tall, clean-shaven black man in a wrinkled gray suit rose slowly from the last bench and walked with calm, deliberate steps down the center aisle. No lawyer, no folder, no entourage, just him. From the back row, two uniformed officers leaned in. "That him?" one whispered. "Gotta be. Look at him. Bet he's one of those fake sovereign citizen types," the other muttered. "Gonna tell the judge the Constitution doesn't apply." They chuckled, loudly enough to turn a few heads, but Elijah didn't react. His expression didn't shift. Not a twitch, not a blink. It was the kind of stillness that felt practiced, like he'd stood in this exact moment a dozen times before, in a dozen different cities. Judge Douglas Hart, older, pale-skinned, with a thinning comb-over and a voice made for small-town radio, adjusted his glasses and glanced at the man now standing in front of him. "Elijah Monroe," he said slowly, flipping through a folder. "You're being charged with failure to comply during a lawful traffic stop. Is that correct?" "That's what the report says," Elijah replied calmly. "No attorney with you?" "I don't need one." More chuckles from the back row. The judge glanced at the officers but didn't say a word. The air had that low-pressure weight that comes right before a thunderstorm. Not enough to snap the moment. Just enough to make you feel something was off. "Well," the judge said, tapping the folder, "looks like a minor infraction. We'll make this quick. Mr. Monroe, do you have anything you'd like to say before we proceed?" Elijah stepped forward. He moved slowly, like each step was measured, deliberate. He reached into his coat, and one of the officers in the back instinctively stood halfway, hand drifting to his holster. Elijah paused, then calmly pulled out a slim, laminated badge and placed it gently on the judge's bench. "I'm Elijah D. Monroe," he said, voice unshaken. "Director of Internal Affairs, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Silence hit the room like a gunshot. The judge stared at the badge, mouth slightly open, glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose. The officer who had stood sat down quickly, eyes locked on the badge like it might explode. "You're with the FBI?" the judge asked finally, voice cracking slightly. "I oversee misconduct investigations across the southeastern region," Elijah said, "including departments flagged for repeated body cam failures and unrecorded use of force complaints." For a moment, you could hear everything and nothing. A cough, a shoe shifting on the floor. Somewhere in the gallery, someone whispered, "Oh, damn." The judge sat back, visibly paler now. "Would you mind stepping into chambers for a moment, Mr. Monroe?" Elijah didn't even blink. "I prefer everything stay on the record," he said. One of the officers tried to stand again, stammering. We didn't know who he was." Elijah turned to look at him, not angry, not smug, just looking, measuring. "You didn't ask," he said. And in that moment, the entire courtroom realized. This wasn't just a traffic violation. This was the beginning of something much, much bigger. The silence in the courtroom didn't dissolve. It calcified. Every breath felt measured, like the entire room had agreed not to move until someone else did. But Elijah Monroe stood still, as if time was just another tool he refused to lend to the unworthy. One of the officers, the one who had laughed the loudest, shifted in his seat. "You're with the FBI?" he asked again, but softer this time. Elijah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Behind the judge's bench, Darlene, an experienced court clerk who had worked 3 decades without flinching, stood without being asked. "Your Honor," she said calmly. "Would you like me to verify that badge?" Judge Hart nodded, barely concealing the tremble in his fingers. "Please." Elijah stepped back from the bench, giving her space. He folded his hands in front of him and said nothing. He didn't have to. The badge already said enough. And while Darlene picked up the courtroom phone, dialing a number no one else could hear, Elijah let his mind drift, not away, but backward. Back to the night this all began. Back to the moment they put hands on him. It was just after 10:30 p.m. when he'd pulled off Highway 45 near Biloxi, Mississippi. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still shimmered under the orange glow of roadside lamps. He'd been driving all day, a silver Toyota Camry, nothing flashy, deliberately plain. He liked to stay unnoticed. That night, he was headed toward a small motel off Bayou View Drive, the kind of place where no one asked questions. He was finishing a quiet sweep of several small departments flagged for irregularities, use of force inconsistencies, missing footage, delayed incident reports. His role wasn't dramatic. It was methodical, until the red and blue lights showed up behind him. Elijah sighed, slowed, pulled to the shoulder without hesitation. His hand stayed at 10 and 2. In the rearview mirror, 2 white officers stepped out. Both looked mid-30s. One was bald and already had a flashlight in hand. They didn't approach with care. They didn't even introduce themselves. The bald one knocked sharply on the window, his knuckles hitting the glass like a warning. "License and registration." Elijah rolled the window halfway. Calm. Still. "What's the reason for the stop, officer?" "License. Registration," the cop repeated, more forcefully. "You didn't use your blinker back there," added the second officer, now appearing on the passenger side. "That's a moving violation." Elijah glanced at the dashcam in his mirror. He was sure he had used the signal. But he didn't argue. "I'm fairly certain I did," he said. The first officer scowled. "You got something to hide?" "No," Elijah replied, voice level. "But I'd like to know whether this is a traffic stop or an interrogation." That was the moment things shifted. The bald officer leaned in closer. "You giving me attitude?" "I haven't refused anything," Elijah said. "I asked a question." "Step out of the vehicle." Elijah didn't move. He simply handed over his license. It said Elijah D. Monroe, no FBI mention, just a man from Montgomery, Alabama, with a clean record. Still, it wasn't enough. "Where you headed?" "I can't say." "You can't or you won't?" Elijah met his gaze. "Federal protocol." That phrase didn't just irritate the officer. It triggered something deeper, resentment maybe, power unchecked. "What the hell does that mean?" the cop snapped. "You think you're above the law?" Elijah didn't reply. The second officer yanked open the passenger door. "Get out of the car. Now." Elijah's voice dropped, lower than before. "This stop is no longer lawful." But they didn't care. They pulled him from the vehicle. Roughly, efficiently. The kind of force that came not from necessity, but familiarity. Knees in his back, gravel in his mouth. One officer cursed. The other radioed it in as refusal to comply. Elijah never shouted, never fought. He just watched the dirt beneath his face and let the small audio recorder in his coat pocket do the shouting for him. Because the moment the lights had flashed behind him, he had pressed record. Not out of fear, out of habit. The kind of habit you develop when you've seen what happens to men who look like you, especially in the South. Back in the courtroom, the silence wasn't just lingering. It was growing heavier by the second. Even the fluorescent lights above seemed quieter, as if the room itself had stopped breathing the moment Elijah Monroe laid that badge on the bench. Darlene, the clerk, Re-entered, not hurried, not flustered, just certain. She held a notepad in her hand, the kind of paper that didn't just carry words but consequences. She leaned toward Judge Hart and said, clearly enough for the front rows to hear, confirmed. FBI, Internal Affairs, Southeastern Division, 27 years in service, rank matches, identity verified. The judge's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For a man who had opened court with practiced rhythm and casual authority, he suddenly looked small, smaller than the badge, smaller than the weight it carried. The gallery sat frozen. Even a toddler who had been squirming earlier now sat perfectly still, perhaps sensing what no one had said out loud. This wasn't supposed to happen. The two officers who had brought Elijah in, Brent Lawson and his partner, were still seated near the back, but now they looked like they were melting into their uniforms. Brent's jaw twitched. The other officer leaned toward him. "There's no way this guy's playing us, right?" Brent didn't answer. The other whispered again. "That badge looked real. That ID looked real. This might be real. Then we're screwed." Elijah heard them. He didn't respond. Instead, he kept his eyes locked on Judge Hart, who finally found his voice. "Mr. Monroe, you're claiming to be—" "Not claiming," Elijah interrupted, calm as ever. "I am." He gestured lightly toward the badge. "You can call Director Travis McCall's office in D.C., or the Office of Inspector General, if you'd like further confirmation." The judge looked toward Darlene, but she was already a step ahead. She nodded once, meaning, "No need. It's real." The air in the room thinned. You could feel the shame circling the rafters, slow, deliberate, undeniable. The prosecutor, who had barely spoken since Elijah walked in, opened his mouth, then promptly closed it again. Because what was there to say? Elijah finally stepped forward. "I didn't come here to make a scene," he said, voice low but resonant. "I didn't even come here to file a complaint. I was on assignment, off the record, traveling through departments under review." He paused, scanning the room. "I didn't volunteer my identity because I wasn't obligated to. I complied. I gave my license. I followed the law." Another pause, but I was assaulted. I was dragged from my car, detained without cause, held without explanation, and I documented every second of it. The judge leaned back slowly, folding his hands as if trying to hide their slight tremble. "Mr. Monroe, I'm not here for your apology," Elijah said, cutting him off without raising his voice. "I'm here to request that the charges be dropped immediately, and that both arresting officers be placed on administrative leave, effective today, pending a federal inquiry." The room didn't react. It recoiled. The prosecutor tried to speak again, but Judge Hart raised his hand, silencing him. "Granted," he said almost under his breath. Brent Lawson shot forward in his seat. "You're suspending us? Just like that?" The judge didn't answer, because Elijah was already turning to face them. "This isn't about me," he said quietly. "This is about every person you've treated like they didn't matter. Every citizen who didn't have a badge to flash." His gaze was sharp now. Direct, "I do. And I still ended up face down in the dirt." Brent's mouth opened. "We didn't know who you were, all right?" "If we had known." Elijah raised one hand. "Not to shout. Just to stop him. That," he said, "is the problem." Elijah Monroe didn't linger in the courtroom after the decision was made. He didn't wait for the judge to apologize, or for the bailiff to whisper an awkward "sir," or for the two officers to stutter out excuses as they were escorted away under stunned stares. He didn't need their remorse. He needed a pattern. By the time he returned to the small motel off Bayou View Drive, the rain had settled into a low, steady tap on the windows. Elijah sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open, tie loosened, shoes still on. A steaming paper cup of motel coffee sat untouched on the nightstand. He opened a secure folder marked Jefferson County Review. The arrest report was already there, hastily filed, full of vague phrases. Subject appeared non-compliant. Failed to identify destination. Displayed signs of agitation. He'd seen those lines before, too many times. Different names, same lazy script. He pulled up the digital logs, recent stops, flagged incidents, body cam activations. Then he ran a scan. Outages. 6 in the past 10 months, all listed under malfunction. All during stops involving Black or Latino drivers. Not a single glitch reported during stops with white motorists or during officer training simulations. He leaned back, not surprised, just confirmed. He called the DOJ's regional evidence liaison. The voice on the other end was efficient and cool. Yes, Agent Monroe. This isn't the first time Jefferson County's popped up on our radar. 3 prior complaints, none escalated. 1 plaintiff moved out of state. The others dropped charges. Elijah didn't sigh, didn't scowl. He just wrote it all down. He wasn't emotional about it. Emotion clouded precision. What he needed was structure. Next, he logged into the department's camera request portal and filed a formal inquiry. Time-stamped, officer IDs, date, and location. An hour later, the response came. We regret to inform you that the body cam footage from the incident on May 14th is unavailable due to technical malfunction. We are currently reviewing maintenance logs to determine the source of the failure. Elijah read the message 3 times. Not because he doubted it, but because he didn't. He pulled up the server metadata again, ran a trace for internal access logs. 2 entries, both tied to the same username, B. Lawson. The first, 2 hours after the arrest, the second, the following morning. Both entries accessed the video directory. One had a deletion flag. That was enough. He closed the laptop halfway just until the screen dimmed but didn't sleep. He didn't want to sleep. Instead, he pulled out a notepad, the kind that never got hacked, never failed to save, and began to write. At the top of the page, in sharp black ink, he wrote 4 words. They knew. They deleted. Then underneath it, time to escalate. Because this wasn't just about being pulled over. This wasn't even about being assaulted. This was about how easy it had become to bury everything when no one asked who you were, and Elijah Monroe was done letting them forget. The next morning, Elijah Monroe walked through the front doors of the Jefferson County Police Department like a man walking into a building he'd already investigated. Because, in a way, he wasn't greeted, he wasn't stopped either. The front desk officer looked up, recognized him, and blinked like he'd just seen a federal subpoena take human form. Agent Monroe, we weren't expecting. I'm not here to cause problems, Elijah said, calm but direct. I'm here to confirm patterns. He didn't wait for permission. He walked straight past the entrance, down the hallway toward the operations wing. His shoes echoing off the linoleum like the tick of a countdown clock. He knocked once on Sheriff Thomas Reeves's door and stepped in. Reeves looked up from a desk covered in coffee rings, outdated manuals, and unread emails. His eyes were tired, his shirt half wrinkled, and his mouth halfway to a sorry, I assume you got our email, Reeves said. Elijah placed a manila folder on the desk. I also got access records. He didn't sit. He didn't need to. Someone went into the system after the arrest, Elijah continued. Twice. Deleted the body cam footage before the arraignment. Both logins traced to Officer Brent Lawson. Reeves rubbed his eyes. We're looking into it. No, Elijah said. You're not. I am. He turned toward the door, paused just long enough to deliver the weight of his next sentence. I suggest you have Officer Lawson's badge and service weapon ready by the end of the day. Internal Affairs will be on site by Monday." Reeves didn't argue. He didn't even lift his head. Down the hall, the atmosphere shifted. Officers lowered their voices. Doors closed more quietly. Screens were flipped away from view because they knew Elijah walked with purpose, past rows of silent desks, past the tension that clung to the walls like mildew. He stopped only when he reached a cubicle at the far end, where Jordan Ellis sat at her desk, scrolling through archived reports. She looked up, startled at first, but quickly recovered. "You're back?" "I am," Elijah said. "I need your eyes." Jordan hesitated only for a second, then turned her screen toward him. "These reports go back 5 years, she said. "All same language, non-compliant, vague resistance, equipment malfunction. No interviews, no follow-ups. Most complaints marked unfounded within 48 hours. She clicked into one. A guy got pulled over 3 blocks from home, claimed he was roughed up, filed a report, body cam malfunctioned, report closed without review. She pulled up another. Same thing. And another. This is not one officer. This is a rhythm. Elijah nodded slowly. It's not about one decision. It's about a culture. What gets ignored, what gets erased, and what everyone else learns to call normal. Just then, Brian, the department's IT technician, a quiet, soft-spoken man who rarely looked anyone in the eye, walked into view. He didn't say anything. He just placed an envelope on Jordan's desk. She opened it, scanning the contents. Access logs, camera entries, file deletion timestamps. Her jaw set. These prove it was Lawson, no question. "Thanks, Brian," Elijah said. The man just nodded and walked away without a word. And just like that, the department cracked, quietly, without warning, because all it takes to tear down a wall is someone on the inside finally deciding not to hold it up anymore. By the time the second email hit Sheriff Reeves's inbox, the damage was done. The first had been Elijah Monroe's formal request for full access to department body cam software and personnel records. The second came straight from D.C., marked Compliance Advisory, pending federal oversight. No warning, no breathing room, just a notification that the rules had changed, and Jefferson County was no longer in control. In the basement of the department, IT specialist Brian worked in silence. No one had asked him to run a deeper trace. But curiosity had evolved into conscience. He typed fast, scanned server logs, flagged irregular entries. 2 deletions, 1 user, B. Lawson. One of them executed just hours before Elijah's arraignment. Brian printed the log and walked it upstairs, handing it directly to Jordan Ellis without saying a word. She read it, face blank but eyes storming. Then she walked straight into the sheriff's office. Reeves looked up with a groan. Now what? She dropped the logs on his desk. "This is your proof." Lawson deleted the footage, twice. Reeves didn't say a word, because he couldn't. Across the building, Officer Brent Lawson sat at his desk, pretending to read an incident report, though he hadn't turned the page in 15 minutes. His jaw clenched. His foot tapped. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know when. The department had gone quiet in that specific way buildings do. When truth starts moving through the walls. No yelling, no accusations. Just the kind of silence that makes you sweat. Elijah didn't wait for permission to act. He walked directly to the server room, where Isaac Reddick, the DOJ's digital forensics specialist, had just finished restoring a damaged data segment from a hidden backup node. The recovered audio file was short, but damning. Elijah listened with headphones on. There it was. "Where are you headed?" "Can't say." "You can't or you won't." Federal protocol, thud, scrape, aggressive rustling. "You think you're above the law?" Elijah didn't flinch. He just took a deep breath and headed toward Reeves's office. "Effective immediately," he said, placing a printed order on the desk. "This department is under temporary federal compliance hold. No field patrols unless explicitly cleared. Internal Affairs will be conducting daily audits until the review is complete." "You're shutting us down?" Reeves asked, stunned. "Not shutting, supervising," Elijah replied. "You'll still respond to emergencies, but every non-essential patrol, every stop, every report, it goes through us." Reeves rubbed his face. "You know what this will do to morale?" Elijah stared. "You know what not doing it already did?" That night, the building changed. Doors stayed open. Conversation stopped when Elijah entered the room. Brent Lawson was pulled into a side office. His service weapon and badge were taken quietly. No shouting, no confrontation, just a printed notice marked "effective immediately." But Elijah knew this wasn't just about one officer. This was about years, about weight, about patterns. The next morning, Grace Mendoza, DOJ compliance lead, arrived with a briefcase full of review protocols and a stare like cold steel. She didn't introduce herself twice. She walked into Reeves' office and said, "Training manuals, body cam policy, disciplinary files, all of it," while Isaac Reddick combed the internal servers, recovering more deleted logs than any of them had expected. Grace took over the records room. She flipped through reports from the last 3 years with a speed that came from seeing too much of the same. "Everything looks the same," she muttered to Elijah as they compared complaints. "Because that's the goal," Elijah replied. "Make every lie look like a formality." Down the hall, Jordan was pulling reports too. Complaints previously marked unfounded without a single interview. One name appeared again and again at the bottom of the page: Brent Lawson. She didn't say anything when she found the 3rd one, or the 5th, or the 12th. She just folded the list and walked it to Elijah. This wasn't sloppiness, she said. It was design, and Elijah knew she was right. Because broken systems don't just happen, they're built. By Friday morning, the story had leaked. Not from Elijah, not from the DOJ, but from someone sitting in the gallery of that courthouse who'd seen enough in one afternoon to realize what had really happened. Local news stations were the first to catch wind of it. FBI agent wrongfully arrested during routine stop. Then came the clip, a short, scratchy audio file pulled from the patrol car mic. It was grainy, but it was real. A federal protocol. "You think you're above the law?" The moment echoed across barbershops, school drop-off lines, grocery store aisles, and church foyers. It wasn't just about a man in a gray suit with a quiet voice. It was about something every black parent had whispered to their child in the dark. Be respectful, but be careful. It might not be enough. At Oakland Cafe, 2 elderly men sat over bitter coffee, shaking their heads. "I'm telling you, they didn't pull him over for the blinker. They pulled him over because he didn't look like someone who could say no." Across town, at a small community center, parents gathered for an unofficial meeting. They were tired of explaining why their kids had to move slower, speak softer, keep their hands visible. Tired of pretending this wasn't exactly what they feared. By evening, the mayor, Douglas Hart, held a rushed press conference. "We are cooperating with federal authorities," he said. "We take this very seriously." From the back, a voice cut through the static, then reopened the complaints. It was Felicia Green, whose son had filed a report 2 years ago that was resolved in under 12 hours. "We're looking into it," Mayor Hart replied weakly. "No," she said. "Don't look. Act." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was real. Elijah stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, eyes scanning, not for threats, but for something rarer: readiness. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence was no longer his to break. The community had taken the baton. Later that night, Sheriff Reeves stepped up to the mic at a town hall. "I've been wearing this badge for 31 years, he began. "And I've seen things I should have stopped, things I dismissed. That's on me." He looked at Elijah. "We didn't know who he was? That's not the problem. The problem is, we didn't care who any of you were." Some people clapped, some didn't, but no one left. And that alone said enough. 3 days later, Elijah sat in front of Mayor Hart with Grace Mendoza and Jordan Ellis by his side. On the table between them was a file, thick, undeniable. 5 confirmed violations of departmental policy, Elijah began. 3 instances of falsified reporting, 2 counts of camera tampering, and 1 active attempt to obstruct a federal investigation. The mayor's hands tensed. "You're asking me to terminate one of our longest-serving officers?" "We're asking you to do your job," Jordan said. "To choose between a man who covered lies and a community that just found its voice." The mayor didn't reply right away. Eventually, he nodded. Effective immediately. Curtis Dell, now just a name in a file, was handed a letter that same afternoon. No press conference, no protest, just a folded paper with consequences inside it. And outside, under the golden Mississippi sun, Elijah walked through the square, alone. He passed a group of high schoolers laughing by a food truck. One of them, a tall kid in a blue hoodie, looked up, met his gaze, and gave him a small, knowing nod. Elijah returned the nod and kept walking. It wasn't pride that kept his shoulders straight. It was responsibility. This wasn't a victory. It was a reckoning. He hadn't come to Mississippi to be seen. He came to see what they didn't want found. He didn't raise his voice. He raised a mirror. And what the town saw staring back at them couldn't be unseen. Respect doesn't come from a badge. It comes from what you do when no one's watching. From how you treat someone before you know their title. And from the moment you decide silence is no longer safety. It's surrender. So if this story moved you, even a little, don't let it stop here. Share it. Talk about it. Ask questions. Hold your community to a higher standard. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this aren't fiction. They're warnings, and we need more people listening.